So this is going to be your second video before the quiz tomorrow. All right, so I have on here on the slide, the protest movement emerges, and then from protest to resistance. So in April '65, SDS organized a march on D.C. with 20,000 protesters. So the SDS gets larger by '65 as the war gets more and more unpopular. So in April '65, SDS organized a march on D.C. with 20,000 protesters, mostly college-age younger people. And I have photographs of a lot of these protests. You probably can't see that well, but you'll see better when I show it to you tomorrow, probably. So 20,000 protesters go to D.C. in April '65, organized by SDS. Another 30,000 do another protest that same year in November. So there's another 30,000 protesting in D.C. in November '65, protesting the government, protesting the Vietnam War and the military and everything else. Then a lot of college-age kids got very upset in February of '66. So going into the next year, the government changed their policy to where you had to be in good academic standing to get out of the draft or get your deferment by February of '66. So February '66, they changed the draft policy to where you had to get out. I mean, you had to be in a good academic standing. I mean, you couldn't like be failing or like barely going to classes or be on probation. Those kind of things would get you into the Vietnam War potentially. So you had to be in good academic standing to be able to avoid the draft when they made the change in February '66. But this led to a lot of people protesting and made the protests against Vietnam getting stronger as a result. It led to also a lot of people promoting going to Canada. So it also led to a lot of folks promoting this idea of going to Canada. A lot of the college-age kids and protesters said that Vietnam was a morally unjust war. So a lot of the young people were beginning to say that Vietnam was a morally unjust war. They criticized the fact that that America joins a civil war, then a civil war, and we feel like we have a role in this to play. They also argue that the South Vietnam government was no better than the North Vietnam government. So why are we defending it? And that's a pretty good point. That the fact that we're jumping into this war, we're defending this very corrupt South Vietnam government that wasn't very good to its people just because they weren't communists. And so they said it wasn't any better than the one up north, so why are we fighting against it? A lot of returning veterans and folk singers also protested as well. So a lot of returning veterans and folk singers also protested as well. So a lot of returning vets and folk singers also protested the war as well, especially once they become disillusioned. Folk music was very big in the early '60s, a lot of acoustic instruments, guitars like Bob Dylan, Simon & Garfunkel type people, Joan Baez, these are some popular artists. But before there was like hardcore rock and roll, there's a lot of folk singers protesting the war. By 1967, the anti-war movement intensified. So by 1967, the anti-war, anti-government, anti-president, everything else, military, became more intensified. Many young men began to burn their draft cards. That was a very popular form of protest, was burning draft cards. I have some photographs that's happening here. You probably can't see it that well, but it was very common to see people burning their draft cards in a form of protest because they didn't want to go. This led to about 4,000 people going to jail throughout the Vietnam War. So if you got drafted and you didn't go, you would have to go to jail. That was the policy. So you would have to go to jail. About 4,000 went to jail during the Vietnam War. Another 10,000 fled to Canada. So 10,000 Americans fled to Canada. We mentioned on Friday how Bill Clinton was one of those people who fled to Canada during the war to avoid it. The draft will finally come to an end by 1970 when Richard Nixon's president. So when Nixon takes over, they begin to make the war de-escalate for us. We begin to pull our troops out slowly over time. So there wasn't really a need for a draft anymore. So in 1970, Nixon will end the draft in the United States. There was a very large protest at the Pentagon in D.C. in 1967, and I have a photograph of this up here too, but there was also a very large, thousands of protest group that came to the Pentagon to protest the military and the war itself. The military responded by breaking it up with tear gas and using clubs to break up all these protesters that were on campus, on the Pentagon's campus. All right, last thing, the war divides the nation, hawks versus doves. So by '67, Americans are basically divided into two groups, hawks and doves. The first group are the hawks. These are the pro-war people. Think hawk like a predator. So hawks were in favor of LBJ's policies. They thought we should be in Vietnam. They believed in the policy of containing communism. It was a good reason to be there in Vietnam. They were supportive of domino theory, that we had to stop it here or else it would spread in more places. So there are a lot of Americans who are hawks. In fact, the only people you ever really see on TV are the doves, because they're the ones who are protesting more. But there are plenty of people who are hawks who are they're not out there protesting. The other group are doves, and it's pretty obvious to see who they are. The doves are the ones who are anti-war, more liberal politicians, pacifists, student radicals, and civil rights leaders. So liberal politicians, pacifists, student radicals, civil rights leaders, anti-war people. So people who are anti-war were considered doves. They questioned the war on moral and legal grounds. So they questioned the war and its intentions on moral and legal grounds. But what you understand is that in the first few years of the war, from 64 to 67, more Americans were hawks, were pro-war and supportive, thinking that it was, just like Korea, just like World War II, we were playing an important role. America was very important to stopping and containing communism. It's just that a lot of folks don't vote protest. So a lot of the people who are protesting were radical, more extremists, and a lot of those people who protested were doves because they were very much against the war itself. But most Americans, up until early 68, were in favor of the war. We're going to learn on Tuesday, if not Wednesday, what event kind of shifts perspective and makes more Americans anti-war than for the war. So we're going to stop the video there. You should do Kahoot now as long as you cooperate with the sub. Please follow directions. Don't make the sub regret letting you do this. Don't make me let you regret do this. Use your phone only for Kahoot or the computer in the back for Kahoot, and that's it. I'll send it out through Remind today too. So that's it. Have a good day. Quiz tomorrow.